Support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
Statistically, the Carolinas have been a very good international neighbor when it comes to business and industry, certainly through the lens of trade and as a net exporter of goods and services to the global communities, but also maintaining and developing what Carolinians do well, respectable cross-border relations. Welcome back to the most widely watched source of Carolina business and public policy. I'm Chris William, and according to the numbers, North and South Carolina are among the top third of this nation's export-import players. And what is behind the clinical trade numbers is also important. For instance, social and cultural trade could be at least as meaningful as the direct investments both onshore and offshore. We will begin this week's dialogue in just a moment, and later on, the chairman of the South Carolina Chamber of Commerce and the CEO of one of the most preeminent family businesses in South Carolina, Orangeburg-based Cox Industries' Mikee Johnson.
Major funding also by Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, Tracie Frese, Executive Director of the International Center of the Upstate, LJ Stambuk, President and CEO of the World Affairs Council of Charlotte, and special guest Mikee Johnson, President and CEO of Cox Industries. And now, here's Chris Williams.
Welcome to our program. Tracie, LJ, good to have you both here, and welcome.
Good to be here. Thank you.
LJ, you've got I don't want to make this bigger or less than it is, but you've got a really unique perspective. World Trade Association in Charlotte, talked to a lot of foreign diplomats, certainly foreign ambassadors, but also a product of Europe to some degree yourself. LJ, when you see what's going on with the refugees, with some of the migrant issues going on in Europe, how much of a risk is that to the Carolinas?
Well, let me give you a little bit of a bigger picture. Since January 1 to November to the end of August, there are about 330,000 immigrants just from Syria coming to Europe. Of that, 2,600 died. It's a major crisis in Europe. They call it the largest crisis since World War II. Now, the big picture is there's 4.4 million people who are refugees out of Syria around the world. About 2 million are in Turkey, about 1 million in Lebanon, about 630,000 in Jordan, and even in Iraq, 230,000 people. So it's not limited only to Europe. The interesting part in Europe, and I'll just say that, is that not all the immigrants that we see and the migrants in Europe are actually from Syria. Actually, more of them come from other countries like Eritrea, Nigeria, Albania, and so on. The problem is that Europe doesn't have the mechanisms and laws to deal with this influx.
Is there, not to interrupt you, but is there a halo effect to the Carolinas, both either economically?
There's absolutely going to be a halo effect because it will affect European economy. The instability will translate in obviously affecting what they do and how they do. The costs of dealing with this immigration is huge, and yet it's growing. Every day there's 5,000 new people just coming to the Greek islands from Turkey, and they're coming in and coming in. Most of them want to go to Germany and Sweden. So it's creating internal problems because there are countries that are just against accommodating those migrants who are coming to find security and a safer life. That will affect the U.S., that will affect trade, That will affect foreign direct investment. And for us, Europe is extremely important. The largest investor in North Carolina and South Carolina are Europeans. About 70% of FDI that comes into
foreign direct investment.
Yes, is from foreign direct investment, comes from Europe. Most of our trade flows are with Europe. The jobs that are affected by Europe in the Carolinas, about 700,000 jobs are directly or indirectly connected to trade and foreign direct investment from Europe.
So Tracie, LJ makes a good point, once removed, but we're not so far removed that it couldn't be a problem. When you've heard his comments, you reflect on this. What's your take on this?
Well, my take is in the upstate of South Carolina, where we're located, our European businesses are very comfortable. We have a lot less comfort from our immigrants from China and Asia and areas like that. But I think as far as the effect on the upstate, the companies have been integrated for a long time. They're very comfortable. The incoming new people are the individuals who have a hard time settling in, especially families that are brought in tow. That's where centers and agencies can step in with an understanding of their cultures and their needs and how to help integrate them and then keep those businesses here in South Carolina and North Carolina.
There's a scientific theory called the chaos theory, and it says that when a butterfly flaps its wings in China, that it creates a hurricane in South America. Are we overstating the impact that China has on the Carolinas?
In many ways, yes, and in many ways, no. We have more investment from Europe in the Carolinas than we have investment as a U.S. in China, India, and in Japan. So our relationship is strong. We have only 33 companies from China in Charlotte, for example, out of 1,000 foreign companies. It's growing. It's important. China is an important partner for the world. What happens in China affects the economy, the global economy. However, the good part of it is that China will probably overcome its current economic crisis and problems. And this is something that most analysts agree on. There are structural problems in China that will come and go, that may be even bigger, but that's every economy has that kind of problem.
And there seems to be more difficulty, too, with the Asian companies when it comes to our laws and regulations and the cultural differences in doing business here. And that's where our groups need to find ways to help with that, to make them more comfortable. There's a lot more differences.
You know, what about we talk so much, and LJ used the term FDI, foreign direct investment. We talk so much about trying to measure what foreign direct investment is, what the fiscal performance is on an annual basis from import-export business. But how meaningful is the social and the cultural aspect of the families of those companies that are ingrained and embedded here?
You know, they say foreign direct investment is about economy. It's actually about relationships. It is so important to create the right environment for people to come and find a good environment for their family, for their employees, for themselves. So it's really, really, really important to have what we do have here in Charlotte, which is the whole city working together to create a better environment for people coming and wanting to invest in Charlotte. And there's a number of nonprofit organizations that work on the cultural aspect, that work on the economic aspect, that work on settling people coming in town. So I believe we're really, really well positioned. Charlotte has, as I said, about 1,000 companies. We grew 68% since 2003 in the number of foreign companies that are based here in Charlotte out from 45 countries. So we must be doing something right, but there is always opportunities to do it even better.
So how do you lean into that?
Well, when you look at the upstate region of South Carolina, we have more of our population employed by foreign-owned companies than anywhere else in the nation. That's huge. That's a huge impact on our economy, on our lives, on our culture. One thing we've seen when people move over here internationally and settle, there are still lingering issues, especially for immigrants, as far as if you have a child who gets out of, say, 12th grade and wants to go to college. There's some hurdles as to how they can fund it, how they can qualify to stay. There's a lot of issues as far as the family's longevity here that haven't been addressed or are in the process of being addressed.
And Tracie, in about 30 seconds, do the Carolinas have in place, in your case, upstate South Carolina, have in place a rigorous enough mechanism to handle the social and cultural aspects as the state does with the fiscal and the monetary economic incentives?
We're working on that. We're working on that. Recently, with groups like Upstate Alliance, we have come together with state agencies, businesses, corporations, banking industry, to try to help reinforce the will instead of reinventing it. Instead of reinventing programs, reinforcing what each other does well. And we're getting there, but there's ways to go. We're addressing things like workforce needs, attracting talent, and keeping talent, how that affects us in the long haul.
Yeah, we're going to talk about, I get the sense we're going to talk about workforce in just a second here, but thank you. Stay with us, guys. We've got much more coming up. Next week on this program, he's been here before, but now he's emeritus, so to speak. He is the former chairman and chief executive officer of this nation's largest public utility. Jim Rogers from Duke Energy will be our guest on the program next week. And then in 2 weeks, the senior executive vice president of also one of the largest banks in this nation, David Carroll from Wells Fargo, will join us. Our guest sits at the nexus of manufacturing, of sustainability, of exporting, and of course, one of South Carolina's favorite pastimes, politics. He leads the foremost manufacturer and distributor of treated outdoor wood products, as well as one of the Palmetto State's most notable family businesses. We welcome the president and chief executive officer of Cox Industries and the chairman of the South Carolina Chamber of Commerce, Mikee Johnson. Mr. Chairman, welcome. Good to have you here.
Thanks, Chris. Good to be here.
Mikee, when you all of your business relationships, all of the politics that go on in the Palmetto State, and then you've heard kind of the dialogue here. Mikee, what is the single biggest concern that rattles around with you on a daily basis?
Yeah, I think one of the nice things to know is, while it's my concern, it also seems to be that our state is really in alignment on what its biggest concern is, and that is providing the workforce for these companies that continue to flood into South Carolina, whether they be at manufacturing or service-oriented industries. We are, between our Commerce Department, our Department of Employment and Workforce, our tech colleges, our higher ed systems, and even Molly Spearman with her agency, we are now very focused on the importance of providing a workforce when these companies that are coming to South Carolina have a ready-to-go, ready-to-operate team that can make those companies successful. So it's more than just showing up and building the building, just having the people to fill them up.
Not to be the devil's advocate here, Mikee, but if you made that argument based on the performance of economic development, that'd be a hard argument, because South Carolina's got a head of steam going, not just the manufacturing and the economic development wins, but so I guess the question is, when do you hit a tipping point with workforce development when folks like Boeing and BMW and Volvo are coming, even in light of the fact that there's a workforce skills gap crisis, if you will? When do we hit that tipping point?
Well, I don't know that we're at a crisis point. What I do see is we have about 150,000 people looking for work in South Carolina, actively looking for work in South Carolina. We've demonstrated significant migration of other U.S. citizens moving to South Carolina for our quality of life, for of course, the jobs that we provide. And then, of course, there's naturally, you and I were talking about it earlier, we have a port that's very hard for anybody to argue. We have an infrastructure system, and geographically, we're located in a place where businesses are going to keep coming. So naturally, I think we're going to see people continue to move into our state, not just our own citizens. So from a crisis standpoint, we have the infrastructure to train. Now it's just getting in alignment with what the business expectations are, whether it's the auto sector or the aerospace sector. I mean, I think that's going to be important for us to be aligned with what the needs are of these companies that are coming.
LJ, question?
Yes, I'm as you know, I'm about the global issues. Today, manufacturing to be successful has to have excellent management, which you do. You want the South Carolina excellence in corporate responsibility. You have to have workforce, very well trained workforce, and you have to have innovation. How do you, as a company, compete in this global fierce marketplace?
Yeah, that's a great question, LJ. So one, we're very blessed that our core product is the southern yellow pine tree, and we grow it in the South like nobody else. So that's certainly an added benefit. But I do think what what we see with the diversity of companies that continue to move to South Carolina, I think there's some inherent learning, some osmotic learning that we pick up from whether it's a secondary or tertiary automobile parts manufacturer for a BMW or now soon to be a Volvo, or whether it's one for the aerospace. So I think this innovation challenge is starting to multiply. I think, Chris, you mentioned sustainability. You know, those are things that we used to just use as buzzwords in terms of industry by and large. And now if you're not executing a strategic plan around those, you're in trouble. And so I think that, you know, part of what both of you are doing such a great job of supporting in these new companies coming to South Carolina from outside, we're learning more than probably we had in the past. We usually just used to depend on a lot of strong backs and a lot of good resources, and where we were, now it's taken our businesses to a new level.
Tracie.
How does the Import-Export Bank affect you right now, the EXIM issue that's being addressed right now? I know it's got another vote coming up, but does that affect your industry?
Well, it probably hasn't hit us as much. There are opportunities where we can capitalize on the Import-Export Bank, and despite the fact that a lot of people lean on it as the Boeing or the GE, you know, clearly a lot of small companies have capitalized on it. We ourselves have not used it as much, but during the process, certainly the Chamber and the manufacturers, the Chamber of Commerce, the Manufacturers Alliance, we were advocating, you know, not just to our on behalf of our member companies, but we were also very active with our delegation. And you know, our delegation in South Carolina is not 100% unified on the Import-Export Bank, but I think now when we see announcements like coming from GE that are, you know, it's certainly a wake-up call on the value of how we compete on the global scale that people, I think, quite often take for granted when something like the Import-Export Bank gets labeled as crony capitalism, and then all of a sudden we see the real impact, you know, up front and center. That's an eye-opener. So.
You know, let me drill down a little bit on the workforce skills gap. You and I don't want to put words in your mouth, Mikee, but you're led to believe that it's not at a tipping point. It's certainly important, and you stop short of really saying how it could be taken to the next level. Is it just about throwing money at this issue and getting the technical schools up to speed and funding them to a point where they can teach those that can fill the skills gap? Or is there, I mean, what are the 1 or 2 or 3 steps that need to be done to take away this as being an issue? Yeah,
so I would say first and foremost, just like any business, to have a strategic plan on what your workforce system looks like. Under the direction of Governor Haley, the Department of Employment and Workforce, which all of our viewers may not know is a fairly new agency in South Carolina. So we have a point agency, workforce is in the title, we have a point agency that is now leading a process on the development of a strategic plan. And I know those terms get loosely thrown around, but compounding that, Governor Haley identified in her State of the State, and in fact, we're working with the General Assembly right now on a program called Succeed SC, which does more than just, okay, we need to teach this over here and that over there. We need to create a way to move those that are in entry-level jobs, move them up. So this is kind of an answer to the wage story as well, right? So when you move people that are in entry-level jobs up to the next level, you obviously create more opportunities for that entry-level position. So it's not so much that we need to go pull the next superstar mid-level manager from out of state or from another area. Let's take the talent that we have, the resources, largely our tech school system and our higher education. And we have 20 independent colleges and universities on top of our already ones that we talk about a lot, and with our tech system. And let's elevate those. So having more of a plan and then being in alignment with the other agencies, with Commerce, so we know the companies that are coming, you know, with the tech colleges, so they can be prepared to teach what we need to teach. So it's more than just a disparate system. And if you talk about workforce, there are more programs than anyone could possibly imagine. There's more acronyms. I've been on the workforce board, chairing it for 6 years, and I probably still can't keep up with all the acronyms. So an alignment process, I think, is really where it's at, more than just training the body. So.
And sorry, one more question before we leave this. So Cheryl Stanton is the woman for the job, clearly, at this new department.
We are so blessed to have somebody who actually understands workforce, not just at a local level, but also at the federal level, because there's no doubt a lot of the programs that we are the beneficiaries of are coming from federal initiatives that are out, you know, that are put out there. Probably one of the most comprehensive pieces of legislation that was passed by the federal government that nobody talked about was the Workforce Opportunities and Investment Act this past year. It was almost passed, our Congress unanimously, it barely made a headline, barely scratched the surface, but to understand how to utilize that, how to be a player in that market, we are incredibly blessed to have Cheryl, and she's a joy to work with.
Yeah, LJ?
96% of the world customers are not within our borders. So companies understanding more and more that you need to sell abroad your excellent products to benefit your bottom line. You do have an international sales department, I see. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So back to my original premise, LJ, nobody grows pine trees quite like we do in the southern United States, and so we're very blessed that a lot of people think teak is an exotic species here in the United States. Well, in China, they think pine is an exotic species. So we've had a lot of success in the Far East in moving our products, as well as you take the Caribbean nations. One of our products we manufacture utility poles. They clearly don't have the forest lands on these small islands to grow and manufacture and produce their own. So we're very successful in providing 100% of the utility poles being the United States, but certainly we're one of those key players into the Caribbean. So we have natural resources here. Not a lot of people think about the United States being an exporter of natural resources, but that's where we've had some great success, but not without a lot of learning lessons along the way too, for sure.
Is it going to grow? Let me finish with that.
Absolutely. China clearly is in a little bit of a lull. I mean, it's funny we can say 7% GDP growth is a lull for them. But nonetheless, we saw a little bit of a lull as some of the government projects slowed down. I don't anticipate that to last forever. We'll have to see. I know both of you know a lot more about China than me, but so I think there's some good opportunities there. But there are other parts of the world that have their own forest products. So we will see selective growth in our industry in different pockets of the world, I guess is good.
Okay.
Tracie?
Well, one of our concerns is how do we go about empowering people and businesses of all nations to thrive in the Carolinas, to thrive in our upstate? What do you see as the best way to go about doing that?
Yeah, so I think we've learned, that's a great question, Tracie, and we were talking a little bit about it before. I think one of the things we have learned, we just saw it recently with all the events that went on in South Carolina around the tragedy in Charleston and the flag, but we saw a state that did an amazing job of coming together under tremendous leadership by our governor and pulled all this together. And I only start with that by saying, not that we have come near as far as we need to go as it relates to race relations, but to understand that in the South, we've been, particularly in South Carolina, I think we've had this struggle for a long time. So when we bring another group in, or visitors come from other countries to South Carolina, you mentioned it earlier, it's our natural response to invite them to church. But not invite them to our dinner table. And interestingly, in many of our race relations discussions on how do we move that ball forward, we are talking about how do we get people around the table. Literally, if there's one thing us Southerners like to do, and I'm a perfect case and example, is we like to get around a table and eat and get to know each other. So I think that is something that hopefully as South Carolinians and North Carolina as well, that we've learned it by fire a little bit, right? We've learned it the hard way, but we've been learning it for a while. So hopefully we can see some similar type benefits of understanding that it's just not easy to come to a culture like the South and just fit in, so to speak.
Mikee, we got a couple minutes left, and I want to spend just a couple minutes on this. You started working for a company that your grandfather had started. You started there as a teenager. Your grandfather was recently inducted in the South Carolina Hall of Fame. You yourself were honored as an Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year, U.S. Small Business Administration, South Carolina Family Business of the Year. It goes on and on. The interesting part of that is you're third generation. And third generation, most of the time, are the generation that either dispose of the business or move on. You're not doing that. You've got about 30 seconds to answer. How have you been able to do that and take the business to the next level?
Well, you mentioned my grandfather, Bill Cox, who was an amazing man, and we were very excited to have him recognized. So I would say probably the most critical thing we did, and we did it about 20 years ago, is we put a board of directors in place that were not our family, our friends, our lawyers, our bankers, not the people we paid. They were people we asked to come serve and give a perspective, a view from a different pew, as one of them used to like to tell me quite frequently. They've kept us on the rails, and they've really have shown us an opportunity to continue to grow our business. There is no need to hurry up and monetize. If you're effective on what you do and you reward your shareholders, there's payback.
Mikee, thank you. As always, you're giving other people the credit. Please come back on the program.
Be glad
okay.
to, Chris. Thank
Tracie, good to have you here.
Thank
LJ,
you so
thanks
much.
for making the trip. I know it was hard, about 2 or 3 miles for you. Tough investment.
Very hard. Enjoyed it.
Until next week, I'm Chris William. Hope your weekend is good. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton, operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.org.